A single gunshot echoed through the vast, unforgiving plains of New Mexico Territory. 1876, startling a flock of crows into flight against the blood-orange sunset, as Samuel Steele rode into Silver City with a bullet in his shoulder and demons clawing at his soul. The pain from his wound was nothing compared to the hollow ache that had consumed him since the war, a void so deep that whiskey couldn't fill it, and time couldn't heal it. His horse, a sturdy Palomino named Chance, trudged wearily down the dusty Main Street, sensing his master's agony as blood seeped through Samuel's tattered shirt, drawing curious and wary glances from the townsfolk who had learned to mind their own business in these lawless times. "Reckon you need a doctor, mister," called out an old man from the porch of the general store, spitting a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. "Doc's place is just yonder, past the saloon." Samuel nodded grimly, his vision blurring as he guided Chance toward the small, whitewashed building at the end of the street. His tall frame swayed dangerously in the saddle, and he gripped the horn with white knuckles, determined not to show weakness in a town where vulnerability was an invitation to the grave. The last thing he remembered before darkness claimed him was sliding from his horse and the sensation of falling endlessly into a pitch-black abyss. Zara Whitman had seen countless wounded men in her 3 years as Silver City's only nurse, but something about the unconscious cowboy on Dr. Peterson's table stirred her heart in a way she couldn't explain. Perhaps it was the peaceful expression that replaced his pained grimace once the laudanum took effect, revealing a handsome face beneath several days' growth of dark beard. Or maybe it was the way his calloused hand had reflexively gripped hers when she'd first touched his fevered brow, a desperate, unconscious plea for human connection that resonated with her own loneliness. "Bullet went clean through, Doctor," Peterson muttered, his spectacles perched on the end of his nose as he cleaned the wound with carbolic solution. "Lucky man. Inch to the left and he'd be meeting his maker instead of my needle. Who do you suppose shot him?" Zara asked, handing the doctor fresh bandages while studying the stranger's face. Despite his rugged appearance, sun-weathered skin, a small scar bisecting his right eyebrow, there was something gentle about his features in repose. "In these parts." Could be anyone from a card cheat to a jealous husband. The elderly doctor chuckled humorlessly. "Or maybe Apache. They've been restless since the cavalry started encroaching on their hunting grounds again. Regardless, it's not our business to ask. We patch 'em up, the law sorts 'em out." As Dr. Peterson worked, Zara carefully cut away the bloodied shirt, revealing a torso mapped with old scars, evidence of a hard life lived on the frontier. But it was the faded blue tattoo on his chest that caught her attention. 7th Cavalry, Company D. A soldier, then. One of Custer's men, perhaps, though he seemed too young to have served in the war between the states. "He'll need somewhere to recover," Dr. Peterson said, tying off the last stitch. "The clinic's full with those miners who got caught in that cave-in yesterday." Zara hesitated only briefly. "I have a spare room at my boarding house. Mrs. Hollister won't mind, especially if I explain he's a veteran." The doctor raised a bushy eyebrow but nodded. "Very well. I'll send my boy over with some powders for the pain and fever. Keep the wound clean, change the dressing twice daily. You know the routine." 2 hours later, with the help of the livery stable owner and his son, the unconscious cowboy was settled in the small, tidy room adjacent to Zara's at the Hollister boarding house. Mrs. Hollister, a plump widow with a soft spot for boys in blue, had fussed over the arrangements, providing extra pillows and her special willow bark tea for when the poor dear wakes. As darkness fell, Zara sat beside the stranger's bed, bathing his forehead with cool water as fever gripped him. In his delirium, He murmured names Matthew, Thomas, Colonel, and once cried out in such anguish that it brought tears to Zara's eyes. Whatever demons haunted this man went deeper than the bullet wound in his shoulder. "Hush now," she whispered, smoothing back his dark hair. "You're safe here." His eyes fluttered open briefly, revealing irises the color of summer storm clouds. He focused on her face with difficulty. "Am I dead?" he rasped. "No," Zara replied with a gentle smile. "Though you gave it your best effort, Mr. Steele," he managed before pain creased his features. "Samuel Steele." "Well, Mr. Steele, I'm Zara Whitman. I'll be caring for you until you're well enough to continue your journey." He studied her face with an intensity that might have made her uncomfortable had there not been such profound sadness behind it. "Why?" The simple question caught her off guard. "Because you need help," she answered honestly, "and because that's what I do." A bitter smile touched his lips. "Some men are beyond help, Miss Whitman." "I don't believe that," she said firmly. "Not about any man. Especially not one who's survived this much already." He didn't respond, his eyes drifting closed as exhaustion reclaimed him. But his words lingered in the quiet room, a challenge Zara couldn't ignore. As she adjusted his blankets and prepared to leave, she made a silent vow to herself. This man's physical wound would heal with time and care. But something told her the greater injury lay within a wounded soul that had perhaps given up on healing. And something in her own heart, some instinct she couldn't name, whispered that she might be the one to help stitch that hidden wound as well. Samuel woke to sunlight streaming through lace curtains, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar comfort of a real bed after months of sleeping under the stars or in ramshackle bunkhouses. The pain in his shoulder brought reality crashing back, the ambush outside of Las Cruces, the desperate ride north with what remained of his possessions, the hazy memory of collapsing in a town he'd chosen at random. He attempted to sit up, gritting his teeth against the fire that shot through his left side. A soft knock at the door preceded the entrance of the woman he vaguely remembered from the night before, Zara Whitman. In the clear light of day, he could see she was younger than he'd initially thought, perhaps 25 or 26, with chestnut hair pulled back in a practical knot and intelligent hazel eyes that assessed his condition with professional detachment. "Good morning, Mr. Steele," she said, carrying a tray with a steaming mug and fresh bandages. "I'm glad to see you're awake. How's the pain?" "I've had worse," he replied, though in truth he felt as though he'd been trampled by a herd of buffalo. Her lips curved in a smile that suggested she didn't believe him for a second. "Of course you have. Nevertheless, Dr. Peterson sent these powders for the pain. I suggest you take them before I change your dressing." There was a quiet authority in her voice that brooked no argument, so Samuel accepted the bitter medicine without protest. As she worked efficiently to remove the old bandage, clean the wound, and apply fresh dressings, he studied her. Her hands were capable but gentle, her touch clinical yet somehow comforting. She hummed softly as she worked, a melody he didn't recognize. "Where am I exactly?" he asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "Mrs. Hollister's boarding house, Silver City, New Mexico Territory." She secured the bandage with a neat knot. "You caused quite a stir riding in half-dead yesterday evening." "Sorry for the inconvenience." She shook her head, amusement flickering in her eyes. "No need for apologies. It's been a quiet week, only 3 miners with crushed limbs and a child with scarlet fever. You're practically a holiday." Despite himself, Samuel felt a reluctant smile tug at his lips. "Glad to provide entertainment." "Your horse is at the livery stable," she continued, gathering the soiled bandages. "Mr. Patterson is seeing to him. Your saddlebags and rifle are there in the corner. Mrs. Hollister has already informed the sheriff about your arrival, so you can expect him to call on you once you're feeling stronger. The mention of the sheriff sent a jolt of tension through Samuel. I'm not running from the law, if that's what you're thinking. Zara raised an eyebrow. I wasn't thinking anything of the sort. Sheriff Miller is simply conscientious about knowing who's in his town. Silver City's grown rapidly with the mining operations, and not all the newcomers have been beneficial to the community. Samuel nodded, understanding perfectly. Every boom town attracted its share of predators, gamblers, con men, thieves, and worse, all looking to profit from the hard work of others. And what about you, Miss Whitman? He found himself asking. How did you come to be in Silver City? A shadow passed across her face so quickly he almost missed it. I came west for opportunity like so many others. I trained as a nurse in Boston after the war and found my skills were needed more here than back east. She stood, picking up the tray. Now, Mrs. Hollister will bring you some broth and biscuits soon. Doctor's orders are for you to rest today. Tomorrow, if you're feeling stronger, you can sit up in the chair for short periods. I don't plan to stay long, Samuel said. Once I can ride. You won't be riding anywhere for at least 2 weeks, Mr. Steele, she interrupted firmly. That bullet tore through muscle that needs time to heal. Unless you fancy the idea of permanent disability or bleeding to death in some God-forsaken canyon, you'll follow Dr. Peterson's instructions. Her bluntness was refreshing after years of people tiptoeing around him, afraid of saying the wrong thing to the haunted cavalry veteran. Yes, madam, he replied with a mock salute. She rolled her eyes but couldn't quite hide her smile as she left the room. Samuel settled back against the pillows, the medicine beginning to dull his pain. 2 weeks in Silver City. 2 weeks in the care of a sharp-tongued, kind-hearted nurse with eyes that seemed to see right through his carefully constructed walls. The prospect was both unsettling and, strangely, not entirely unwelcome. Over the next several days, Samuel's strength gradually returned. True to her word, Zara allowed him to sit in the chair by the window on the 2nd day. And by the 5th day, he was permitted short walks in the hallway, her hand discreetly supporting his elbow when fatigue threatened to overcome him. Sheriff Miller, a grizzled former Texas Ranger with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, paid his expected visit on the 3rd day. To Samuel's relief, the lawman asked few questions beyond confirming he wasn't wanted anywhere and getting a basic description of the men who'd ambushed him. Sounds like the Dawson brothers, Miller had said, jotting notes in a small book. They work the trail between here and Las Cruces, picking off lone travelers. I'll send word to the marshal in Mesilla. Not that it'll do much good, those snakes know every hiding hole in the territory. The sheriff had given Samuel a measuring look before leaving. Miss Whitman's well-respected in this town, saved a lot of lives since she came here. Folks are protective of her. The warning was clear. Whatever Samuel's past, whatever had brought him to Silver City with a bullet in his shoulder, he'd better not bring trouble to the door of the woman who'd taken him in. By the end of his first week of recovery, Samuel had established a routine. Mornings began with Zara changing his bandages before she left for the clinic. Mrs. Hollister brought breakfast and chattered about town gossip while he ate. The afternoons were his own, spent reading books Zara loaned him or watching the bustling street from his window. In the evenings, after returning from the clinic, Zara would often join him for supper in his room, sharing stories of her day while carefully avoiding asking direct questions about his past. On the 8th day, feeling restless and confined, Samuel ventured downstairs to the boarding house's small parlor after lunch. Mrs. Hollister was delighted to have company while she mended sheets, and Samuel found himself oddly content to listen to her tales of Silver City's early days when her late husband had opened the first proper mercantile in town. "You play chess, Mr. Steele?" she asked suddenly, nodding toward a small table in the corner where a carved set waited. "I used to," he admitted, "though it's been some years. Miss Whitman plays beautifully. Her father taught her, she says. Perhaps you could give her a match sometime." "The poor girl works too hard, needs more recreation, if you ask me." That evening, when Zara appeared with their supper tray, Samuel gestured to the chess set he'd brought up from the parlor. "Mrs. Hollister tells me you're a player. Care to demonstrate your skills after we eat?" Something like pleasure flashed in her eyes. "Are you certain you're up to the challenge, Mr. Steele? I wouldn't want to tax your recovering constitution." "I think my constitution can handle a friendly game," he replied, finding himself genuinely looking forward to the diversion and to learning more about his mysterious caretaker. Zara proved to be a formidable opponent, aggressive in her attacks yet patient in developing her strategy. As they played, the conversation flowed more freely than it had during their previous interactions. "Where did you serve?" she asked, capturing his bishop with a deft move. Samuel tensed, then consciously relaxed. It was a natural question, given the tattoo she'd undoubtedly seen. "7th Cavalry. Joined in '66, right after the war. Spent most of my time in Kansas and Dakota Territory." She nodded, waiting for him to make his move. "My brother Thomas served as well, died at Antietam." "I'm sorry," Samuel said and meant it. "I was too young for that war, 15 when Lee surrendered. But I had 2 cousins who never came home from Gettysburg. Too many didn't come home." Her voice was soft. "And some who did brought the war back with them." Their eyes met across the board, and Samuel knew she wasn't just speaking generally. She had recognized something in him from the start: the restlessness, the nightmares, the way his hand sometimes strayed to where his sidearm would be at unexpected sounds. "Some wounds don't bleed," he acknowledged, making his move. "Makes them harder to treat. Not impossible, though." Her fingers lingered on her queen before advancing it. "Just requires a different kind of medicine." "And what would that be, in your professional opinion?" Her smile was gentle, but her eyes held challenge, purpose, connection, forgiveness, especially of oneself. Check. Samuel studied the board, realizing she'd maneuvered him into a corner while he was distracted by her words and the warmth they kindled in his chest. "Clever," he murmured, tipping his king in surrender. "Another game tomorrow." "I'd like that," she replied. And for the first time since riding into Silver City, Samuel found himself looking forward to something beyond the next day's sunrise. The chess games became a nightly ritual, accompanied by increasingly personal conversations. Samuel learned that Zara had come west after the death of her fiancé, a young doctor who'd succumbed to typhoid while treating an outbreak in Boston's poorest neighborhood. She spoke of her parents, her father, a professor of literature, her mother a midwife, and her childhood in Massachusetts, with a wistfulness that suggested she missed them deeply. In turn, Samuel found himself sharing pieces of his own story. Growing up on a small farm in Ohio, his father's death from pneumonia when Samuel was 12, enlisting in the cavalry to escape the poverty that had claimed his mother soon after. He spoke of the camaraderie he'd found with his fellow soldiers, the pride in serving a country struggling to rebuild itself after the devastation of civil war. What he didn't speak of not yet were the darker memories, the brutal campaigns against the Plains tribes, the women and children dead in the snow at Washita River, the faces of men who had trusted him and died following his orders. Those ghosts remained locked away, though sometimes he caught Zara watching him with a look that suggested she sensed their presence nonetheless. By the end of his second week in Silver City, Samuel's wound had healed enough that Dr. Peterson declared him fit for light activity. No riding or heavy lifting for another week, the doctor cautioned, but fresh air and gentle exercise would do you good. That afternoon, Zara suggested a walk to the Mercantile. Mrs. Hollister needs a few things, and I suspect you're tired of staring at the same four walls. The late October day was perfect crisp air, cloudless blue sky, the cottonwoods along the creek displaying gold and russet leaves. Silver City hummed with activity. Miners coming off shift at the nearby diggings, freight wagons delivering supplies, children playing hoops in the schoolyard. Samuel found himself noticing details he would have overlooked before. The wild asters blooming in vacant lots, the careful craftsmanship of the new church steeple, the way sunlight caught in Zara's hair and revealed auburn highlights. At the Mercantile, he insisted on carrying the basket despite her protests about his shoulder. The simple domesticity of helping her select coffee, sugar, and lamp oil felt foreign yet strangely right, as if he'd stumbled into someone else's life, a normal life, free from the weight of the past that had driven him to wander for so long. As they were leaving the store, a commotion erupted down the street. A man on horseback was shouting, his words indistinct but his tone urgent. People began rushing toward the livery stable, and Samuel instinctively placed himself between Zara and the potential danger. "What's happening?" she asked, standing on tiptoe to see over the gathering crowd. Before Samuel could answer, Sheriff Miller appeared, his expression grave. "Mining accident," he called out. "Cave-in at the Bonanza. Multiple injured coming in." Zara's demeanor changed instantly. She handed Samuel the basket and straightened her shoulders. "I need to get to the clinic. Dr. Peterson will need help." "I'll come with you," he said without hesitation. She shook her head. "Your shoulder is fine enough to carry supplies or hold bandages," he insisted. "I've had field medical training. I can help." Something in his tone must have convinced her, for she nodded and started toward the clinic at a rapid pace. Samuel followed, ignoring the twinge in his shoulder as they hurried through town. The next several hours were a blur of activity. The accident had trapped 15 miners, with rescuers managing to free 12. Of those, 8 were seriously injured, broken limbs, crush injuries, one man with a steel splinter embedded dangerously close to his eye. Dr. Peterson's small clinic was overwhelmed, and Zara quickly organized a triage system, directing the walking wounded to the saloon across the street where the barkeeper's wife, a former midwife, could tend minor injuries. Samuel found himself assigned to assist with a young miner whose leg had been pinned under fallen timber. The bone was broken, the skin abraded but not pierced, a clean break that Dr. Peterson said would heal well if properly set. As the doctor worked, Samuel held the man still and spoke calmly to him, distracting him from the pain with questions about his hometown in Pennsylvania and his sweetheart who was traveling west to join him in the spring. Across the room, Zara moved with graceful efficiency, her hands sure as she cleaned wounds, administered laudanum, and assisted with more complex procedures. Once, their eyes met over the heads of their patients, and Samuel saw in her gaze the same focused intensity he'd once felt in battle, the absolute commitment to the task at hand, where nothing existed beyond the immediate need. It was past midnight when the last patient was stabilized. 3 miners remained at the clinic under Dr. Peterson's care. The others had been sent home with family members or to the boarding house that served as an overflow infirmary in emergencies. Samuel's shoulder throbbed dully, but the satisfaction of having been useful far outweighed the discomfort. "You should have mentioned your medical experience earlier," Zara said as they walked slowly back to Mrs. Hollister's in the moonlight. Exhaustion shadowed her eyes, but there was a quiet contentment in her bearing that Samuel recognized the feeling of having done good work. It hardly seems worth mentioning. Basic field medicine: how to stop bleeding, stabilize fractures, remove bullets when no surgeon was available. He shrugged. Nothing compared to your training. You saved that boy's leg today, she said softly. Doctor Peterson told me how you recognized the signs of compartment syndrome and insisted on loosening the splint. Another hour and he might have lost it. Samuel felt a warmth in his chest at her words. It had been a long time since he'd felt he'd done something unequivocally good, something that had saved rather than destroyed. They walked in comfortable silence for a few blocks, the stars brilliant overhead in the clear desert sky. Samuel found himself thinking of other nights under these same stars, nights when he'd lain awake listening to the lonely cry of coyotes and wondering if he'd ever feel at peace again. Tonight, with Zara's arm occasionally brushing his as they navigated the uneven boardwalk, peace seemed tantalizingly possible. I never asked, Zara said suddenly, what brought you to Silver City? What were your plans before you were injured? Samuel considered the question. The truth was, he'd had no real destination in mind when he'd left the ranch in Colorado where he'd been working as a hired hand. Just another restless move in years of drifting. I didn't have plans, he admitted. Not specific ones. I'd heard there was work in the Arizona Territory, ranches expanding, needing experienced hands. And before that, you mentioned Colorado. Before that, Wyoming, Montana, Dakota Territory. He gave a self-deprecating smile. I'm what you might call a rolling stone, always alone. The simple question pierced him unexpectedly. Yes, he said after a moment. Always alone. They had reached the boarding house, but neither made a move to go inside. Zara turned to face him, her expression thoughtful in the moonlight. Why? She asked, and there was no judgment in her voice, only genuine curiosity. Samuel looked away, focusing on the distant mountains silhouetted against the night sky. It's simpler. No one to disappoint, no one to mourn you if things go wrong. That sounds like a lonely way to live. It is, he acknowledged, surprising himself with his candor. But it's safer for everyone. She was silent for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was gentle but firm. I don't believe that, Samuel. Safer isn't always better. Sometimes the things that heal us most are the very things we're afraid to reach for. Before he could respond, she touched his arm lightly. Thank you for your help today. You made a difference. Then she was gone, slipping inside the house and leaving Samuel with her words echoing in his mind, and an unfamiliar ache in his heart, not the pain of old wounds, but something newer and more frightening. Hope. The mining accident marked a turning point. As word spread of Samuel's assistance at the clinic, townsfolk began to treat him differently, a nod of acknowledgement here, a friendly greeting there. The mother of the young miner with the broken leg brought a freshly baked apple pie to the boarding house, insisting on thanking the gentleman who kept my Jimmy from losing his leg. More significantly, Dr. Peterson approached him the following day with an unexpected proposition. Miss Whitman tells me you have medical experience from your cavalry days. Some, Samuel acknowledged cautiously. Nothing formal, the doctor harumphed. Formal training's all well and good, but practical experience counts for more out here. The fact is, I'm not getting any younger, and this town's growing faster than I can keep up with. I could use an assistant, someone to help with setting bones, stitching wounds, the occasional bullet extraction. Interested? Samuel stared at the older man, taken aback. I'm not. I mean, I was just passing through. So was I 30 years ago, Dr. Peterson replied dryly. Silver City has a way of turning passing through into staying on. Think about it. Pays not much, but it includes room and board above the clinic, and there's satisfaction in the work. The offer lingered in Samuel's mind as he helped Mrs. Hollister repair a broken porch step that afternoon. The idea of staying in one place, of having purpose, routine, community, was both appealing and terrifying. For so long, he defined himself by his ability to leave at a moment's notice, carrying nothing that couldn't fit in his saddlebags. The freedom of the drifter's life had been his shield against forming connections that would inevitably lead to pain. But here in Silver City, for the first time since leaving the cavalry, he found himself considering a different path. He thought of the young miner's gratitude, of Dr. Peterson's gruff respect, of Mrs. Hollister's maternal fussing. Most of all, he thought of Zara, her quiet strength, her compassion, the way she challenged him with every look and word to be more than the sum of his regrets. That evening, their chess game was interrupted by a knock at the door. Sheriff Miller entered, his expression serious. "Evening, Miss Whitman, Steele," he greeted them. "Sorry to intrude, but there's news you should hear. The Dawson gang hit the stage from Lordsburg this morning, killed the driver and wounded a passenger before making off with the strongbox." Samuel felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "The same men who ambushed me," Miller nodded grimly. "Descriptions match. They're getting bolder. Army patrol from Fort Bayard is tracking them, but I thought you should know they're operating in the area again. After the sheriff left, the mood in the room had changed." Samuel found it hard to concentrate on the game, his mind racing with implications. The men who'd attacked him, who'd left him for dead after taking his money and spare horse, were nearby, possibly planning their next robbery. "You're thinking of going after them?" Zara's voice cut through his thoughts, not a question but a statement. Samuel looked up, surprised by her perception. "They need to be stopped." "By you." Her tone was neutral, but he could see concern in her eyes. "Your wound is barely healed, and hunting outlaws is a job for the law, not for a drifter with no stake in this community," he finished when she trailed off. "That's not what I was going to say." She moved her knight, capturing his pawn. "I was going to say it's not a job for one man alone, no matter how justified his anger." Samuel studied the board, seeing parallels to his own situation, isolated pieces easily captured, while those working in concert stood a fighting chance. "What if I'm not alone?" he said slowly. "What if I have a stake here?" "Do you?" she asked, her gaze steady on his face. The question hung between them, laden with meaning beyond the immediate discussion of outlaws. Samuel realized with sudden clarity that his answer mattered to her, and increasingly to himself. "I'm beginning to think I might," he said quietly. The following morning, Samuel sought out Sheriff Miller. The lawman was unsurprised by his offer to help track the Dawson gang, though he eyed Samuel's still healing shoulder skeptically. "I've got 2 deputies already," Miller said. "One's barely old enough to shave, the other's older than dirt. A man with your experience could be useful if you're fit to ride." "I'm fit enough," Samuel insisted. "And I know what these men look like. I can identify them." Miller considered him for a long moment, then nodded. "We ride at dawn tomorrow. Army's sending a scout to join us, Navajo fella who knows this country better than most. Pack for 3 days. If we haven't found them by then, chances are they've crossed into Arizona territory, and that's beyond my jurisdiction." When Samuel returned to the boarding house to prepare, he found Zara waiting in the parlor, her expression troubled. "Mrs. Hollister told me you spoke with the sheriff." Her hands twisted in her lap. "You're joining the posse?" "Yes." Samuel sat across from her, wishing he could ease the worry in her eyes. "I need to do this, Zara. Not just for revenge, though I won't pretend that's not part of it. These men are dangerous. They've killed before and will kill again. I understand that." She looked down at her hands, then back up at him, determination replacing concern. "Promise me you'll be careful, that you won't take unnecessary risks." "I promise," he said, meaning it. For the first time in years, he had a reason to return safely, a reason that went beyond simple survival. They spent the evening in quiet conversation, deliberately avoiding mention of the danger ahead. Instead, they spoke of simple things: favorite books, childhood memories, the first snow of winter that would soon dust the mountains surrounding Silver City. It was as if by focusing on these normal aspects of life, they could keep at bay the knowledge that tomorrow might change everything. As Samuel prepared to retire to his room, Zara suddenly reached for his hand. "Wait," she said softly. "There's something I want to give you." From her pocket, she withdrew a small object, a tarnished silver medallion on a leather cord. "It belonged to my brother," she explained. "He carried it through 2 years of war before Antietam. Our father gave it to him for protection." She pressed it into Samuel's palm. "I'd like you to carry it now." Samuel stared at the medallion. St. Christopher, patron saint of travelers, feeling the weight of her trust. "Zara, I can't take this. It's a family heirloom, please," she interrupted, closing his fingers over the medallion. "For my peace of mind, if nothing else." Their hands remained joined, the medallion warm between their palms. Samuel was acutely aware of her nearness, of the faint scent of lavender that clung to her skin, of the concern in her eyes that spoke of feelings neither had put into words. "I'll bring it back to you," he promised, his voice rough with emotion. "You have my word." Before he could second-guess himself, he leaned forward and pressed his lips gently to her forehead, a gesture of reassurance, of promise, of things unsaid but understood. She didn't pull away, and when he finally stepped back, the look in her eyes gave him more courage than any battle cry ever had. Dawn broke cold and clear, the eastern sky painted in shades of pink and gold as Samuel rode with Sheriff Miller, the 2 deputies, and the Navajo scout named Thomas out of Silver City. Chance, recovered from their arduous journey and eager for the open trail, pranced beneath him, sensing excitement in the air. Samuel wore the medallion Zara had given him beneath his shirt, the metal warming against his skin. His wound ached dully with the motion of riding, but Dr. Peterson's final check had confirmed it was healing well. More importantly, his shooting arm was unaffected, a fact he'd verified with practice at the makeshift range behind the livery stable the previous afternoon. The trail left by the Dawson gang was not difficult to follow. They had made no particular effort to hide their passage, confident in their knowledge of the territory and the general reluctance of most citizens to pursue armed outlaws. By midday, the posse had tracked them to an abandoned mining camp in the foothills, 20 miles northeast of Silver City. 4 horses in that corral, the scout reported after observing the camp through a spyglass. 3 men visible. They appear to be dividing something, likely the contents of the strong box. Sheriff Miller nodded grimly. Dawson always was careless after a successful robbery. Too busy counting his take to watch his back. He turned to Samuel and the deputies. "We'll approach from 3 sides. Jenkins, you and Holt circle around to the west. Steele, you're with me coming in from the east. Thomas will cover the south approach in case anyone tries to run. No heroics, these men are killers. If they surrender, fine. If not." The implied alternative hung in the air. Samuel checked his revolver one last time, his mind clear and focused. This wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about justice, about preventing these men from harming others as they'd harmed him and the stagecoach driver. The plan unraveled almost immediately. One of the outlaws stepped outside to relieve himself just as Deputy Jenkins was moving into position and spotted the lawman. Gunfire erupted, the element of surprise lost. Samuel and Sheriff Miller were forced to charge the camp directly, using a dry stream bed for partial cover as they closed the distance. Bullets whined overhead, kicking up dust around them. Samuel felt the familiar cold focus of combat descend, his movements becoming automatic as he returned fire, aiming carefully to conserve ammunition. One outlaw fell to the sheriff's shot, clutching his thigh and howling in pain. Another, the youngest, barely 20 by the looks of him, threw down his weapon and raised his hands in surrender. But the leader, whom Samuel recognized as the man who'd shot him outside Las Cruces, backed toward the corral, using the wounded outlaw as a shield while firing wildly with his free hand. "That's far enough, Dawson," Miller shouted. "Drop the gun. Go to hell, Miller," the outlaw leader snarled, his face contorted with desperate fury. "I'm not swinging for this." Samuel had worked his way to the side of the camp, using an abandoned ore cart for cover. He had a clear shot at Dawson, but taking it risked hitting the wounded man being used as a shield. It was a shot that required absolute precision, the kind of shot he'd made before in combat, but had prayed he'd never have to make again. Time seemed to slow as Samuel steadied his breathing, sighting along the barrel of his revolver. The medallion pressed against his chest, a tangible reminder of his promise to return safely. He thought of Zara of chess games by lamplight, of her quiet strength, of the future that might be possible if he survived this day. He squeezed the trigger. Dawson crumpled, a neat hole appearing between his eyes before he could register what had happened. The wounded outlaw he'd been holding staggered free, collapsing to the ground in shock. Just like that, it was over 3 outlaws dead or wounded, 1 surrendered, no casualties among the posse. As Sheriff Miller secured the prisoners and recovered the stolen money, Samuel holstered his weapon, his hand steady but his soul turbulent. The shot had been necessary. Justified. Dawson had been about to fire at Miller, but taking a life, even one so deserving of justice, never came without cost. Thomas, the Navajo scout, appeared silently at his side. "Clean shot," he said simply, neither condemning nor praising. "You've done such work before." It wasn't a question, but Samuel nodded anyway. "In another life." The scout studied him with dark, knowing eyes. "The past rides with us always. But it need not determine where we go." He gestured toward Silver City, invisible beyond the hills but present in both men's thoughts. Sometimes the trail home is the hardest to find. They returned to town late the following day, dusty and weary but successful. The stolen money had been recovered, the surviving outlaws secured in the town jail to await the circuit judge. Word of their return spread quickly, and a small crowd gathered in front of the sheriff's office to hear the news. Samuel, uncomfortable with the attention, slipped away as soon as he could. He stabled Chance, promising the faithful horse extra oats for his service, then headed for the boarding house, his body aching with fatigue but his mind clearer than it had been in years. He found Zara waiting on the porch, her face lighting with relief at the sight of him. Without hesitation, she hurried down the steps and embraced him, heedless of his trail dust and the watching eyes of neighbors. Samuel's arms closed around her automatically, the simple human contact more healing than any medicine. "You came back," she whispered against his chest. "I promised I would." He drew back slightly, reaching inside his shirt to retrieve the medallion. "I brought this back to you." She shook her head, closing his hand over it. "Keep it. It seems to work for you." Later, after he'd bathed and changed into clean clothes, they sat together on the porch swing in the gathering dusk. Samuel recounted the events of the past 2 days, omitting the more violent details but not shying away from the truth of what had happened. "I took a man's life," he said quietly. It was necessary. He was about to shoot the sheriff, but still. He trailed off, unable to articulate the complex emotions swirling within him. Zara's hand found his in the fading light. You did what you had to do to protect others. That's different from what happened before. Samuel looked at her sharply. What do you know about before? Her expression was compassionate but unflinching. I know about Washita River. Dr. Peterson recognized your regiment tattoo. His nephew served with the 7th. Samuel felt as though the ground had shifted beneath him. His greatest shame, the massacre of Black Kettle's peaceful village in 1868. The women and children killed in the snow was known to her. He had participated reluctantly, following orders while sickened by what was happening, but participation made him guilty nonetheless. It was the reason he'd left the cavalry, the specter that had haunted his wanderings ever since. Now you know why I can't stay, he said hoarsely. Why I don't deserve. Stop. Her voice was firm. You were a soldier following orders in an impossible situation. The man I've come to know these past weeks is kind, honorable, and brave. That's the man I believe in, the man who risked his life to help others, who sat with a frightened miner while his leg was set, who plays chess with patience and teaches Mrs. Hollister's grandson to whittle. Her hand tightened on his. The past doesn't define you unless you let it. It's not that simple. No, it isn't, she agreed. Healing never is, but it's possible, Samuel. I've seen it happen. She hesitated, then spoke words that pierced straight to his core. Let me help you. You've been tending the wound in your shoulder, but I see the deeper wound in your soul. Let me stitch the inside, too. The tenderness in her voice undid him. For the first time in years, Samuel felt tears burn behind his eyes, not tears of grief or regret, but of relief, of the profound unburdening that comes with being truly seen and still accepted. I don't know how to let go, he admitted. I've carried it so long. One day at a time, she said softly. And not alone. Never alone again if you don't want to be. In the deepening twilight, with the sounds of Silver City settling into evening around them, Samuel made the most courageous decision of his life. He turned toward the future instead of the past, toward healing instead of punishment, toward love instead of isolation. I'd like to stay, he said. Dr. Peterson offered me a position as his assistant. I'd like to accept it if the offer still stands. Zara's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. I think he'd be pleased, and so am I. When he leaned forward to kiss her tentatively at first, then with growing certainty as she responded, it felt like coming home after a journey so long he'd forgotten what home meant. In that moment, with her lips warm against his and her hands steady on his shoulders, Samuel Steele finally began to believe that some wounds, even the deepest ones, could heal with the right care and enough time. Spring came early to Silver City in 1877, bringing wildflowers to the hillsides and new beginnings to its residents. Samuel had settled into his role as Dr. Peterson's assistant with a dedication that surprised everyone except Zara. His natural aptitude for medicine, combined with his cavalry experience and Peterson's mentorship, made him a valued member of the community in short order. The clinic's second story had become his home, a small but comfortable apartment that he'd furnished gradually with items crafted by his own hands or purchased from local craftsmen. The walls, once bare, now held sketches Zara had drawn of the surrounding landscape, and bookshelves housed volumes on medicine alongside novels they read aloud to each other on quiet evenings. For Samuel, the transition from drifter to settled man had been both challenging and rewarding. There were still nights when he woke in a cold sweat from dreams of gunfire and falling snow, but they came less frequently now. On those occasions, he would walk to the window and look out at the sleeping town, reminding himself that the past could not be changed, but the present and future were his to shape. Zara had been true to her word about helping stitch his wounded soul. With patient listening and gentle questions, she had encouraged him to speak of the memories that haunted him, drawing the poison from old wounds as skillfully as she treated physical injuries. In turn, he had become her confidant, the person she turned to when the loss of a patient weighed heavily on her heart, or when letters from her distant family stirred homesickness. Their courtship had progressed steadily through the winter months, conducted partly in public church socials, community gatherings, rides into the surrounding hills, and partly in private moments stolen between their duties at the clinic. Mrs. Hollister, self-appointed chaperone and enthusiastic supporter of their relationship, pretended not to notice when their chess games extended late into the evening, or when Samuel lingered on the porch with Zara long after propriety suggested he should depart. On a perfect April morning, with desert wildflowers painting the hillsides in purple and gold, Samuel asked Zara to accompany him on a ride to a spot he discovered during his increasingly frequent explorations of the area around Silver City. She readily agreed, curious about the secretive smile that played at the corners of his mouth whenever he mentioned the outing. They rode for an hour, following a creek that wound through cottonwood groves until they reached a small valley nestled between protective hills. A natural spring bubbled from rocks at one end, creating a pool before flowing onward to join the larger creek. Cottonwoods provided dappled shade, and the valley floor was carpeted with wildflowers. "It's beautiful," Zara breathed, dismounting to better appreciate the secluded paradise. Samuel tied their horses where they could graze on the lush grass near the spring, then took Zara's hand, leading her to a flat rock beside the pool. "I found it by accident, tracking a lost calf for the Henderson Ranch," he explained. "No one seems to know about it. It's not on any map I've seen." They sat together, enjoying the peace of the hidden valley, the only sounds the bubbling of the spring and the occasional call of birds in the trees. Samuel found himself studying Zara's profile, the curve of her cheek, the wisps of hair that had escaped her practical braid, the smile that played on her lips as she watched a hummingbird dart among wildflowers. "I've been thinking," he said after a comfortable silence. "A dangerous pastime," she teased, turning to face him. "Indeed," he smiled, taking her hands in his. "I've been thinking about the future, about putting down roots, real ones, not just a room above the clinic." Zara's expression grew serious, attentive. "What kind of roots?" "The kind a man puts down when he's found where he belongs." Samuel's heart pounded, but his voice remained steady. "I've spoken to Mr. Henderson about this valley. It's part of his range, but at the edge of his property, too far from the main ranch for him to use effectively. He's willing to sell it 40 acres, including the spring and enough good land for a small ranch or farm." "Samuel." Zara's eyes widened with understanding. "I've been saving everything I earned from Dr. Peterson," he continued. "It's not much yet, but enough for a down payment. I could build a house here, nothing fancy at first, but solid. Room to expand." He paused, gathering courage for the words he'd rehearsed countless times in his mind. "Room for a family, if you'd consider making one with me." Tears welled in Zara's eyes, catching the morning sunlight. "Are you asking me to marry you, Samuel Steele?" "I am." He squeezed her hands gently. "I know I don't have much to offer yet." "You have everything to offer," she interrupted. "Everything that matters." "Is that a yes?" he asked, hardly daring to hope despite the joy shining through her tears. "Yes," Zara whispered, then laughed, the sound echoing across the valley like music. "Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll build a life with you here." Samuel pulled her into his arms, his heart so full it seemed impossible to contain such happiness. As he held her, feeling her tears dampening his shirt and her hands clutching his back, he marveled at the journey that had brought him to this moment, from wounded drifter to a man with purpose, hope, and love. Later, as they shared the picnic lunch Mrs. Hollister had packed for them, just in case you work up an appetite riding, she'd said with a knowing smile, they began planning their future. The wedding would be small but proper, held in the new church once it was completed in June. Dr. Peterson, delighted by the match, had already offered to give the bride away in the absence of her father. "What about your parents?" Samuel asked. "Would they come for the wedding if you wrote to them?" Zara considered the question. "Mother is too frail for such a journey, I think. But perhaps father might come." She smiled wistfully. He always wanted to see the West, and he should meet the man who finally convinced his stubborn daughter to settle down. As the afternoon waned, they reluctantly prepared to return to town. Before mounting their horses, Samuel took a last look at their valley now, the place where they would build a home and, God willing, raise children who would know nothing of war and wandering. "What shall we call it?" Zara asked, following his gaze. Samuel thought for a moment. "Healing Springs," he suggested, "because that's what this place represents: a fresh start, a chance for wounds old and new to mend." "Healing Springs," she repeated, leaning into his side. "It's perfect." The wedding of Samuel Steele and Zara Whitman in the summer of 1877 was remembered in Silver City as one of the most joyful events in the town's young history. The bride wore a gown of cream-colored silk sent by her mother from Boston, while the groom cut a handsome figure in a new black suit purchased for the occasion. Dr. Peterson gave the bride away with tears glistening in his usually stern eyes, and Mrs. Hollister sobbed happily through the entire ceremony. To everyone's delight, Zara's father had made the arduous journey west to attend the wedding. Professor Whitman, a dignified man with his daughter's intelligent eyes and gentle manner, had taken an immediate liking to Samuel. The two men had spent long evenings in conversation, finding common ground in their love of history and shared respect for the remarkable woman who connected them. The couple's first months of marriage were divided between their duties at the clinic and the construction of their home at Healing Springs. Samuel proved as adept at building as he was at medicine, working alongside the experienced carpenter they'd hired and learning as he went. By the time autumn painted the cottonwoods gold, the house was habitable, a sturdy two-story structure of native stone and locally milled timber, with wide windows to capture the valley's beauty, and a deep porch where they could watch the sunset. Their work at the clinic continued, with Samuel taking on more responsibility as Dr. Peterson gradually reduced his hours. The older doctor had begun to speak of retirement, suggesting that Samuel consider formal medical training back east to eventually take over the practice entirely. "You have the hands and the instincts for it," Peterson told him one evening after they'd successfully treated a complicated compound fracture. "And the dedication. This town will need a doctor long after I'm gone." The idea took root in Samuel's mind not as an impossible dream, but as a practical goal. With Zara's encouragement, he began corresponding with medical schools, inquiring about requirements for admission. His cavalry service and subsequent experience as Peterson's assistant might, the doctor suggested, allow him to complete a shortened course of study. Life at Healing Springs settled into a rhythm dictated by the seasons and their work. They planted fruit trees and a vegetable garden, added a small stable for their horses, and began to acquire a few head of cattle to establish a modest herd. On days when neither was needed at the clinic, they worked side by side on the land, building the foundation of a life neither had dared imagine before finding each other. One crisp October evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson, Zara turned to Samuel with a smile that held a secret. "I've been thinking about the second bedroom," she said casually. "The one we've been using for storage." Samuel nodded, wondering at her sudden interest in household arrangements. "What about it?" "I think we should clear it out, paint it. Perhaps get a cradle from Mr. Jensen, he's quite skilled with woodworking." For a moment, Samuel didn't understand. Then comprehension dawned, bringing with it a wave of emotion so powerful it left him speechless. "Zara," he finally managed, his voice unsteady, "are you saying—" She took his hand and placed it gently on her stomach. "Dr. Peterson confirmed it yesterday. In the spring, there will be 3 of us at Healing Springs." Samuel had thought himself familiar with joy since meeting Zara, but the happiness that flooded him at her words was beyond anything he had experienced. He gathered her in his arms, pressing his face into her hair to hide the tears that sprang to his eyes. "A baby," he whispered, awestruck. "Our baby." Later that night, as Zara slept peacefully beside him, Samuel lay awake, contemplating the miracle of their lives. 5 years earlier, he had been a broken man riding the lonely trails of the West, carrying wounds too deep to heal and guilt too heavy to bear. Now he was a husband, soon to be a father, with a home and purpose and a future bright with promise. He thought of the day Zara had said those words that changed everything. "Let me stitch the inside, too." She had seen in him the possibility of healing when he could see only damage beyond repair. With patience, love, and unwavering faith, she had helped him find his way back to himself, not the haunted ex-soldier who had ridden into Silver City with a bullet in his shoulder, but the man he was always meant to be. As the moon cast silver light across their bed, Samuel placed his hand gently on Zara's stomach, where their child grew safe and protected. "I promise you," he whispered to the new life too small yet to hear or understand, "you will grow up knowing only love and peace. The shadows that haunted your father will never touch you." Zara stirred slightly, covering his hand with hers even in sleep. The simple gesture of connection, of shared dreams and mutual protection filled Samuel's heart to overflowing. Whatever challenges the future might hold, they would face them together, their love a shelter stronger than any storm. In the quiet of their home at Healing Springs, with the woman he loved beside him and the promise of new life ahead, Samuel Steele finally understood the truth that had eluded him for so long. Some wounds may never fully disappear, but with love, they could become not scars but strength, reminders not of pain endured but of healing achieved, one carefully placed stitch at a time. The years that followed brought changes to Silver City and to the family at Healing Springs. Samuel and Zara welcomed their daughter, Elizabeth Thomas Steele, named for Zara's mother, and the Navajo scout who had offered Samuel wisdom when he most needed it in the spring of 1878. Beth, as she was called, arrived with a full head of dark hair and her mother's expressive eyes, immediately capturing the hearts of everyone who met her. Dr. Peterson made good on his plans to retire, transferring his practice to Samuel after the younger man completed a year of intensive medical study in Denver. The old doctor remained in Silver City as a trusted advisor and frequent visitor to Healing Springs, where he delighted in teaching young Beth about the local plants and their medicinal properties. The small ranch prospered under the couple's careful management. What had begun as a few head of cattle grew into a respectable herd, and the fruit trees Samuel had planted began to bear abundantly. They added sheep, chickens, and a milk cow, creating a self-sufficient homestead while maintaining their connection to Silver City through the medical practice. Beth grew into a curious, capable child with her father's quiet determination, and her mother's compassionate spirit. By the age of 6, she was helping in the garden, collecting eggs from the henhouse, and occasionally accompanying her parents to the clinic in town, where she solemnly handed instruments to her father during minor procedures. In 1885, the family expanded again with the birth of James Peterson Steele, a robust boy with a lusty cry, and what Mrs. Hollister described as a look that says he means to take on the world. Young Jamie had barely learned to walk when his father received the letter that would present the family with their greatest challenge yet. The letter came from Boston from Zara's mother, now widowed and in failing health. Elizabeth Whitman's carefully penned words spoke of loneliness, of physical decline, and of a deep desire to see her daughter and grandchildren before it was too late. Samuel found Zara on the porch after the children were asleep, the letter clutched in her hands, tears streaming silently down her face in the moonlight. "We should go to her," he said simply, sitting beside his wife and taking her hand. Zara looked at him in surprise. "To Boston." "But the practice, the ranch, can wait," Samuel finished. "Your mother cannot." And so, in the autumn of 1887, the Steele family embarked on the long journey east by stage-coach to the railroad at Lordsburg, then by train across the continent to the city Zara had left behind 15 years earlier. Mrs. Hollister promised to watch over their home, while a young doctor from Santa Fe agreed to cover Samuel's practice temporarily. Boston was a shock to Samuel's system, the crowds, the noise, the sheer density of humanity packed into narrow streets and towering buildings. Even more jarring was the stark division between wealth and poverty, the extremes of society that had been somewhat muted in the more egalitarian West. For 10-year-old Beth and 2-year-old Jamie, the city was a wonderland of new experiences: horse-drawn trolleys, gaslit streets, shop windows filled with unimaginable treasures. For Zara, it was a bittersweet homecoming, familiar streets now changed by time and progress, faces once known now aged or absent. Elizabeth Whitman lived in the family's old home, now too large for her diminished circumstances, but maintained through careful economy after her husband's death. The reunion between mother and daughter was tearful and tender, the older woman's frail arms reaching eagerly for the grandchildren she had known only through letters and daguerreotypes. "You look well, Zara," Elizabeth said, studying her daughter's face with loving attention. "The West has been good to you." "It has, Mother," Zara agreed, glancing at Samuel with a smile that encompassed all they had built together. "Though I've missed you terribly." What had been planned as a visit of a few weeks extended into months, as the severity of Elizabeth's condition became apparent. Heart trouble, the Boston doctors said, treatable with rest and proper medication, but requiring ongoing care. The unspoken question hung in the air. Who would provide that care when the Steele family returned to New Mexico? The answer came on a snowy December evening as Samuel and Zara sat by the fire in the Whitman parlor, speaking in low voices while Elizabeth napped, and the children played quietly with a set of carved wooden animals Samuel had made them. "We could take her with us," Samuel suggested. "The climate might be good for her, and there's room at Healing Springs." Zara's eyes filled with grateful tears. "Could we? The journey is so long and she's so frail. We'll travel slowly with stops to rest. And once there, she'll have the best care we can provide: fresh air, good food, and her family around her." Samuel took her hand, his expression serious. "She's your mother, Zara. Family is family, no matter which direction the journey takes." The decision made, they began preparations for the return journey. Elizabeth was apprehensive but determined, her desire to remain part of her daughter's life outweighing her fear of the unknown West. By February, when the worst of winter had passed, but before spring mud made travel difficult. They were ready. The return journey was indeed arduous, slower, and more carefully planned than their eastward trip, but Elizabeth proved surprisingly resilient. Each mile westward seemed to invigorate rather than exhaust her, and by the time they crossed into New Mexico territory, she was sitting up in the train car, gazing out at the vast landscape with wonder. "I never imagined such space," she confessed to Samuel. "Such freedom." "It's what drew me here," he replied, understanding perfectly her awe at the boundless horizons. "What kept me here until I found someone that mattered more than freedom." Their arrival in Silver City caused a stir of excitement. Mrs. Hollister had organized a welcome committee, and it seemed half the town had turned out to greet the returning doctor and his family. Elizabeth, overwhelmed by the warmth of their reception, found herself surrounded by friendly faces eager to make her feel at home. Spring at Healing Springs that year was a season of adjustment and renewal. The house, expanded over the years to include a dedicated office where Samuel could see patients without traveling to town, now gained another addition, a sunny room for Elizabeth that overlooked the garden and the spring-fed pool beyond. To everyone's surprise, especially her own, Elizabeth thrived in her new environment. The dry, clean air eased her breathing, and the pace of life dictated by sunrise and sunset rather than social obligations suited her contemplative nature. She took over the management of the household with tactful efficiency, freeing Zara to return to nursing work when needed while ensuring that young Jamie was never without loving supervision. Most unexpected was the friendship that developed between Elizabeth and Thomas, the Navajo scout who had become a regular visitor to Healing Springs over the years. Thomas, now serving as an interpreter between the territorial government and his people, appreciated Elizabeth's quick intelligence and willingness to learn about Navajo culture. In turn, she found in him a kindred spirit who shared her love of language and storytelling. One evening, as the extended family gathered on the porch to watch a spectacular sunset, Elizabeth remarked, "I understand now why you could never come back east to stay, Zara. This place, it has a power to it, a healing quality." "That's why we named it Healing Springs," Samuel said, bouncing Jamie on his knee while Beth leaned against his side, engrossed in a book. "It healed something in me I thought was broken beyond repair." "And me," Zara added softly, "though I didn't recognize my own wounds until they began to mend." Elizabeth nodded, a peaceful smile on her face as she watched the last golden light fade from the distant mountains. "I believe I may have a few wounds of my own that could use some healing," she admitted. "Grief has been my companion for too long." The years continued to pass, marking their passage with the growth of children, the expansion of the ranch, and the deepening of bonds both within the family and with the wider community. Beth, following in her parents' footsteps, developed an interest in medicine and began to assist in her father's practice when she wasn't attending the school in Silver City. Jamie, more drawn to the land itself, shadowed the ranch hands and learned the arts of horsemanship and animal husbandry from an early age. Elizabeth, defying the Boston doctor's grim predictions, lived another 12 years at Healing Springs. When she finally passed, peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78, she left behind journals filled with observations of Western life and the beginnings of a dictionary of Navajo terms, the fruit of her friendship with Thomas and her enduring curiosity about the world around her. In 1899, as the century drew to a close and Silver City grew from frontier settlement to established town, Samuel and Zara celebrated their 22nd wedding anniversary with a gathering that brought together the many strands of their remarkable life. Former patients, neighboring ranchers, friends from town, and even a few Navajo families from the reservation where Thomas now served as an agent joined them at Healing Springs for a day of feasting and storytelling. As twilight fell and the guests began to depart, Samuel found Zara standing by the spring that had given their home its name. The years had touched them, both silver threaded his dark hair and fine lines marked the corners of her eyes, but to Samuel, she was more beautiful than ever, her face now a map of a life fully lived. "What are you thinking?" he asked, slipping his arm around her waist. She leaned into him, comfortable in the familiar embrace. "I was remembering a frightened, wounded cowboy who rode into Silver City one day, and how close he came to riding right back out again. If he had, he'd have missed everything that mattered," Samuel said softly. Zara turned to face him, her eyes reflecting the deep understanding that had grown between them through joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge. "Do you remember what I said to you that day when you were ready to leave? When you thought your soul was too damaged to stay? Every word." He touched her cheek gently. "Let me stitch the inside too." "And did I?" she asked, a hint of vulnerability in her voice even after all their years together. "Did I help heal what was broken?" Samuel's answer was in his kiss, tender, reverent, filled with the love that had sustained them through nearly a quarter-century together. When he finally drew back, his eyes shone with the light of absolute certainty. "You did more than stitch the wounds," he told her, his voice rough with emotion. "You showed me how to live whole again, how to build rather than just survive, how to love without fear." He gestured toward their home, where Beth was playing the piano while Jamie and his friends sang along, their voices carrying through the open windows into the gathering dusk. "You gave me a family, a purpose, a place to belong." "We gave those things to each other," Zara corrected gently, "and to our children." As night fell over Healing Springs, stars appearing one by one in the vast New Mexico sky, Samuel Steele held the woman who had saved him in more ways than she would ever know. The past, with all its shadows, could never be erased, but it had been transformed, not a burden to be carried alone, but a foundation upon which they had built a life of extraordinary richness. From wounded drifter to respected healer, from solitary wanderer to beloved husband and father, his journey had been one of redemption in its truest sense. And it had begun with a single gunshot on a dusty road, leading him to Silver City, and to the woman brave enough to believe that even the deepest wounds of the soul could heal with time, love, and careful tending. As they walked hand in hand back to their home, to the warmth and light waiting within, Samuel offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the bullet that had nearly ended his life, but had instead led him to its true beginning. Sometimes, he reflected, the most grievous wounds opened the path to the most profound healing, a truth he and Zara had discovered together at Healing Springs.